Hello, my name is James Herman, and I'm doing my presentation on auditory processing disorder. So you're probably wondering, what is auditory processing disorder? Well, auditory processing disorder, it becomes difficult for the ears and brain to coordinate fully. This causes abruption with the brain with recognizing sounds. Students with this condition hear sounds and are dissected into one-at-a-time sequences. Usually in a quiet and modified environment is where they thrive. These students struggle with background noise, and it really hinders their ability to learn in the classroom and focus, which ultimately causes frustration. So the signs and symptoms of APD, it's not being able to fully understand words or sounds, trouble focusing in a noisy environment, and having improvement in a quieter environment. Students with APD have difficulty with spelling, especially math, and lastly, following conversations. APD is diagnosed by having an audiologist examine the child through a variety of listening tests. What the audiologist looks for is deficits in auditory figure ground, closure and acoustic sounds, dichotic listening, temporal processing, and biannual interaction. So how common is APD? Well, I found this article, and this was very interesting to see, from the Hearing and Health Foundation, that APD affects 1.94 out of every 1,000 children. Then there was a 2011 research paper that said that APD affected 0.5 to 1% of the general population. And this doesn't include when students are referred to an audiology clinic. When they are referred to an audiology clinic, students, about 5% are affected and 0.9% of adults. And then autism and APD are linked, and these similarities include information on behavior and social and communication difficulties. So how exactly does APD hinder learning? This means ultimately that it's difficult for the child to inhibit isolated sounds and language. And then the communication between the ears and the brain, that's the part that's responsible for teaching us to remember what we hear. And these students cannot connect the two or have difficulties doing so. And then we know APD is an auditory deficit and is unrelated to the order of higher cognitive language. So after researching the topic of auditory processing disorder, there's 4 types of auditory processing disorders that are mentioned in the slide, and we'll start with auditory discrimination. That's where differentiating and hearing similar but opposite sounds, like connected between the ears and the brain. Then there's auditory figure ground. Processing and distinguishing a sound becomes difficult with background noise. So like a student may be working on an assignment and just can't seem to focus with all the background noise, like maybe a kid's sharpening a pencil too loudly, or something's just aggravating the kid and he cannot focus because of that. Then there's auditory memory, which is where it's difficult to recall sounds. There's an auditory cohesion difficulty where problems such as conversations occur during higher level listening. Lastly, there's auditory sequencing. This is where one has difficulty remembering words in the correct order. So they can remember A and D, but B and C, they get tangled up and they can't remember those. Here's a list of accommodations for auditory processing disorder in the general ed classroom. This isn't including the physical education classroom. So this includes visual cues, focusing on keywords, helping with sequencing, assistive technology, and preferred seating. Then I found a recent article by the North Shore Pediatric Therapy. Talks about providing modifications for students with sensory disabilities. These include providing the student with an out. That means when a lesson becomes too stressful or it becomes too much, just giving them a safe space to go that's quiet, maybe with headphones, just to process what's going on. This ultimately will help the student. Here's a list of accommodations for auditory processing disorder in physical education, which can be used in adaptive PE. So first we see underlined is having the student in front of the gym. This way the student can see the teacher, can hear the words, and be close enough to ask questions and understand what exactly is going on. This goes next to providing one-on-one instruction, writing down verbal instructions, making instructions into smaller steps, and having the student repeat the instructions and giving visual cues. Also, letting the student know in advance what they're going to ask or what we're going to be going over. And that includes keeping the parents informed. That way, the child can go home and practice in a quieter setting the skills necessary that you're teaching. For example, if you're teaching basketball, teaching the student about dribbling, then telling them exactly what to go over with a paper notes. That way they can go home and they can practice at home with their parents. So here's an example of a lesson plan I created for students with APD in the physical education classroom. This game is called the Turkey Trot. It's a math, teamwork, and fitness game for grades 3 through 5. 6th grade could play it as well. As you can see, there's equipment there. But the biggest thing is the accommodations. And if you see the accommodations, it says notes of the lesson with pictures and words, creating a safe space, having headphones, having students with APD in the front so they can hear and see the presentation clearly, having a buddy that you trust that does well for you in class to assist them, and also periodically checking in on those students to make sure they are successful. These are really good accommodations to use for students with APD in the physical education classroom. So here's an example of a lesson plan I created for students with APD in the physical education classroom. This game is called the Turkey Trot. It's a math, teamwork, and fitness game for grades 3 through 5. 6th grade could play it as well. As you can see, there's equipment there. But the biggest thing is the accommodations. And if you see the accommodations, it says notes of the lesson with pictures and words, creating a safe space, having headphones, having students with APD in the front so they can hear and see the presentation clearly, having a buddy that you trust that does well for you in class to assist them, and also periodically checking in on those students to make sure they are successful. These are really good accommodations to use for students with APD in the physical education classroom. And lastly, I'd like to talk about my personal battle with auditory processing disorder. I was actually diagnosed with this disorder after high school when I had trouble taking the ACT exam. And my teachers prior had mentioned that I'd possibly had a learning disability, but I just didn't want to get it checked out. And finally I did by an audiologist, and they found out that I did have APD. And I just remember everything felt like it was spiraling out of control when I was trying to take tests. I was always the last one to finish taking a test, and it seemed like every little noise just bothered me. I'd take a test, and then maybe I heard someone breathing too loud or someone tapping their pencil or things like that, and I just had a hard time just focusing on my actual work due to that. And I finally got it taken care of after high school, and I'm still learning about it. And through this research with this paper, I'm actually finding out more about it, and I'd wish that I had done something about it earlier. And I know for my son, I want to make sure he's taken care of, and if I notice these things going on with him, I'll know that I can get him checked in with an audiologist. But I just wanted to share my personal battle with it. And hopefully you can understand more about this disability, because it's not talked about much. And I think it should be. And thank you for your time and listening to my presentation. And I hope y'all have a great rest of your school year. And it's been an honor being in class with y'all. Thank you so much.